The Cultural Arts Center was always a busy place, filled with the sounds of footsteps, moving equipment, and distant music drifting from practice rooms. Every day, people came and went, famous musicians, dancers, singers, and staff members who helped keep everything running smoothly. In the middle of all this activity worked a quiet cleaner named Lena. She moved through the halls with a steady pace, her hands busy but her mind often somewhere far away. She didn't complain, didn't slow down, and didn't draw attention to herself. People saw her, but they didn't really look at her. To them, she was just someone who cleaned the floors, wiped the seats, and made sure everything looked perfect for the performers. Every afternoon, after school ended, her daughter Mira joined her. Mira was a small and gentle girl, always holding her backpack close and staying close to her mother's side. She didn't talk much, and most people barely noticed when she came in. She would sit in the corner of the rehearsal hall, quiet, patient, and observant. Some days she drew shapes on scraps of paper. Some days she hummed softly, almost as if she were trying to keep herself company. But every day, without fail, her eyes found the piano dot. The grand piano sat in the center of the hall like a king on a throne. It was polished, elegant, and far too big to ignore. When the performers rehearsed, the hall filled with beautiful music, fast pieces, slow pieces, emotional pieces, and sometimes even messy ones when someone struggled with a part. Myra watched all of this like someone watching magic happen. Her eyes always softened and her shoulders relaxed. It was the one thing that made her feel completely at peace, but she never touched it, not even when the hall was empty. She would walk past it, look at it, and then quickly look away, almost afraid someone might catch her staring too long. To everyone else, she was just a shy kid waiting for her mother to finish work. To her mother, she was simply trying to stay out of trouble so Lena could keep her job. But inside, Mira carried something she never said aloud, a longing, a quiet wish she kept hidden. Lena often felt guilty for bringing her daughter with her, but she didn't have any other choice. Life had not been simple for them. Lena had lost her husband years earlier, and since then, every responsibility rested on her shoulders. She worked long hours for little pay, and the arts center, though demanding, was steady work. She was grateful for it, even though it left her tired most days. Still, every time she saw her daughter sitting alone in the hall, she wished she could offer her more time, more opportunities, more of everything she could never afford. But Myra never complained. She was patient and gentle-hearted, always telling her mother she didn't mind waiting. One particular evening, the hall was brighter than usual. The lights were warm, and the sound of a violin rehearsal echoed from a nearby room. Mira sat on a wooden chair with her feet dangling, not quite touching the floor. She watched her mother sweep under the rows of audience seats, pushing dust and small scraps into a neat pile. The room smelled faintly of polished wood, cleaning spray, and the lingering traces of perfume from a dance rehearsal earlier that day. Mira softly tapped her fingers against her knee, matching the rhythm of the music floating in from behind a half-closed door. Each tap was gentle, almost too quiet to notice. But she was thinking about the piano again. It stood just a few steps away, shining under the lights. Its keys looked like a row of tiny promises she never dared to touch. She remembered the days when her father used to sit on the edge of their old bed and play. A small keyboard he found at a thrift shop. It had only a few working keys, and the sound wasn't perfect, but he loved it. He always said music didn't need to be fancy, it only needed heart. Myra used to sit beside him, her head leaning on his arm as he played simple tunes for her. Sometimes he would guide her tiny fingers across the keys, showing her how to make a sound that felt alive. Those memories were warm, but they also hurt. Ever since he passed, Mira never had the chance to practice again. They couldn't afford another instrument, And the art center wasn't a place where a child like her could just play around. Those pianos were for professionals, for people whose names were written on posters and whose pictures hung in the hallway. Still, the longing never left her. That evening, while her mother cleaned the back of the hall, the room suddenly became silent. The violinist stopped rehearsing. The doors stopped opening and closing. Even the usual chatter in the hallways faded away. It felt like the entire building took a slow, quiet breath. Myra looked around. No one was near the piano. No one was walking by. The air felt still, almost like the world was waiting. She slid off her chair, her feet touching the ground softly. She walked slowly, each step careful, as if the floor might make noise and betray her. Her heart beat faster, not out of fear, but out of nervous curiosity. She didn't plan on doing anything wrong. She just wanted to see the piano up close. The polished black surface reflected her face, small and wide-eyed. She reached out, her hand hovering over the keys. She wasn't touching them, not yet. She knew she shouldn't, but the urge was strong, stronger than it had ever been. She took a slow breath. Her finger touched a single key, just one. The sound was soft, gentle, and warm like the whisper of a memory she almost forgot. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't dramatic, but it was enough to make her heart jump. She pulled her hand back immediately and looked around. No one had reacted. Her mother hadn't turned around. The hall was still quiet. So she touched another key, then another. She wasn't playing a song, just tapping random keys softly, curiously, the way a child touches a new toy. But to her, this wasn't a toy. It was the closest she had ever come to the life she imagined when she listened to professionals rehearse. She tapped a few more keys, each note blending gently in the empty hall. It felt like a secret conversation between her and the piano. With every sound, memories of her father's lessons returned, how he used to smile when she mimicked his movements, how he played songs with more feeling than technique, how he told her she had music in her heart. Myra didn't notice that a sound technician, who had been adjusting cables behind the curtains, paused when he heard the faint notes. He didn't move or speak, he simply listened. The purity of the small sound surprised him, not because of skill, but because of sincerity. In a place filled with professionals chasing perfection, this tiny, innocent tapping felt more honest than anything he had heard all day. Myra kept playing lightly, her face soft with concentration and a small smile forming at the corner of her lips. For the first time in a long while, she felt connected to something she had lost. It wasn't just music. It was hope, warmth, and a reminder that some dreams never truly go away. Even when life becomes difficult, her mother eventually turned around, ready to tell Myra it was time to go home, but she stopped when she saw where her daughter was standing. Lena froze, not out of anger, but out of fear. She didn't want her daughter getting in trouble. She didn't want anyone to accuse her of disrespecting the equipment. She was about to call her softly when she noticed the expression on Myra's face. It wasn't mischief. It wasn't disobedience. It was quiet joy. Lena's heart softened. She didn't say anything. She simply watched for a few seconds, letting her daughter touch a dream she never said out loud. It was a harmless moment, and Myra rarely asked for anything. Just then, a distant voice echoed in the hallway, someone calling for the sound technician. He stepped out from behind the curtain, startled, and quickly walked away without saying a word. Myra didn't even realize he had been listening. Lena finally took a step forward and gently said, "We should go home now." Myra nodded and stepped back from the piano immediately, as if she were afraid she might have crossed a line. She didn't argue or try to stay longer. She simply lifted her backpack and followed her mother. But as they walked out of the hall, Myra turned her head back for one last look. The piano stood there, shining softly under the lights, She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know that this small moment would change everything. She only knew one thing: she wanted to hear that sound again, and something deep inside her whispered that this wasn't the last time. It was only the beginning. Mira woke up the next morning with the sound of the piano still echoing in her mind. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was soft, like a memory that stayed close even after sleep. She lay in bed for a moment, staring at the faded paint on the ceiling, letting the feeling wash over her. She didn't understand why touching those keys felt so important, but something inside her told her that yesterday had changed something. Even if she didn't know what exactly. When she got up, her mother was already preparing for work. Their small apartment smelled of warm tea and toasted bread. Myra sat at the table quietly, watching her mother move around the kitchen with practiced motions. Lena always carried a kind of calm tiredness with her, gentle but heavy. It wasn't sadness, just the weight of responsibility. "Did you sleep well?" her mother asked softly. Myra nodded. "Yes." She wanted to tell her mother about how the piano felt under her fingers, how the sound made her feel alive, how she wanted to do it again. But the words stayed stuck in her throat. She didn't want her mother to worry or think she was asking for something they couldn't have. After breakfast, they left the apartment and walked toward the arts center. The streets were busy with morning traffic, people heading to offices, buses groaning as they pulled up to stops, and shopkeepers rolling up their shutters. Mira walked slightly behind her mother, holding on to the strap of her backpack. When they reached the arts center, the building stood tall and elegant, like always. It wasn't brand new, but it had an old charm to it: large windows, tall doors, and stone walls that echoed footsteps. Myra followed her mother inside, and as soon as they stepped into the hallway, she heard faint music coming from one of the practice rooms. Someone was playing the violin, fast and skillfully. She felt a small tug in her chest. She wished she could go near the piano again, even if just to touch one key. Her mother began her usual routine, checking the supply cart, making sure the cleaning tools were ready, tying her hair back. Myra found her usual spot in the rehearsal hall and sat quietly. She watched dancers stretch in one room and singers warm up in another. Everyone around her seemed to belong to a world she admired from far away. Few performers walked past her without noticing her at all. It wasn't on purpose. They were busy, focused, lost in their own thoughts. Myra didn't mind. She was used to being invisible here. Sometimes she preferred it. Being unseen meant she could watch everything freely, but today felt different. She kept glancing at the piano, remembering how it felt to touch the keys. She tried to distract herself by drawing in her notebook, but the drawings didn't come out right. Her hand kept hesitating, as if her mind was somewhere else. Eventually, she simply closed the notebook and stared at the stage. Hours passed slowly. Dancers left. Singers entered. Someone rehearsed a short speech for an upcoming event. The hall was always busy, yet somehow Mira still felt alone with her thoughts. Every time someone played the piano, even for a few seconds, she watched closely. She memorized their hand movements, the patterns, the way their wrists moved, how they pressed the keys. She didn't realize she was learning just by observing. Around noon, her mother took a short break and brought Mira a small snack. They sat together near the back of the hall. "You're quiet today," Lena said gently. "I'm okay," Myra replied. "You can tell me if something is bothering you." Myra hesitated. Her mother's eyes were warm, patient. Part of her wanted to share everything, but she worried it would make her mother sad. "Nothing is wrong," she said softly. "Just thinking." Her mother nodded, trusting her, though she could sense there was more. Lena placed her hand briefly on Myra's head before standing up again. As the afternoon passed, the hall became quiet for a short moment. Performers cleared out for lunch. The lights dimmed slightly, and a calm silence filled the room. Myra felt her heart beating faster, the same way it did the day before. She looked around. The piano sat alone on the stage. Her mother was in another corner of the hall, cleaning chairs. No one else was inside. The sound technician wasn't adjusting wires today. The room was completely still. Her feet moved before she could think. She walked toward the stage slowly, her steps soft, as though the floor itself was listening. She reached the piano and placed her hand on the edge of it. The surface was cool and smooth. This time, she didn't hesitate as much. She pressed one key dot, then another. A tiny smile appeared on her face. She knew it wasn't allowed, but she also felt that this small piece of joy belonged to her. She wasn't harming anything. She wasn't causing trouble. She was just touching something that made her feel alive. So she continued tapping softly, letting the notes form a gentle, broken rhythm. She didn't know what she was playing. She didn't even know if it made sense. But it made her feel whole. What Myra didn't know was that someone else had entered the hall. A young artist, carrying a large folder of music sheets, walked in silently and froze when she heard the soft piano notes. She looked toward the stage, expecting to see one of the professional players. Instead, she saw a small girl tapping the keys with quiet curiosity. The artist didn't interrupt. She simply watched. There was something innocent about the way Myra touched the piano, as if she was exploring a world she wasn't sure she was allowed to see. It didn't have the sharpness of a trained pianist. It had something softer, purer. After a moment, the artist quietly left, not wanting to disturb the child's brief moment of happiness. Myra continued tapping until she sensed movement behind her. She immediately pulled her hand away and looked up. Her mother was walking toward the stage. "It's okay," Lena said softly, seeing the fear in her eyes. "Just be gentle." Myra nodded, relieved. Her mother rarely allowed such things, but she understood that this small moment meant something. Later in the afternoon, the hall filled again with performers. One of the pianists arrived for his rehearsal. He noticed the piano stool slightly out of place and glanced around, confused for a second. But before he could think much about it, he sat down and began practicing. Myra listened from the corner, studying his hands. She didn't blink for several seconds, afraid to miss anything. The pianist's fingers danced across the keys, sometimes quick, sometimes slow. Every move felt like a secret being revealed. She wished she could copy it. When rehearsal ended, Myra's mother finished her shift. They walked home in silence, but it wasn't the heavy kind of silence. It felt thoughtful instead. Myra kept replaying the piano sounds in her mind. She wished the walk home were longer, so she could think more. At home, she slowly took out her old notebook and began drawing small rectangles shaped like piano keys. She drew dozens of them across the pages, then started practicing finger movements on the paper. It wasn't perfect, but it made her feel like she wasn't completely far from the piano. Her mother passed by her room, paused, and watched her quietly. She didn't say anything. She understood that something inside her daughter had awakened, something she didn't want to extinguish. The next day at the arts center, something unexpected happened. As Myra and her mother entered the hall, a few of the staff members glanced at them with a different expression, curious, almost thoughtful. Myra didn't understand why. She sat in her usual spot, unsure of what was happening. But the reason became clear soon after. Sound technician who had heard her tapping the piano the day before walked over to her mother. "Your daughter has a good ear," he said with a warm smile. Lena froze, embarrassed. "Oh, I'm sorry if she caused any trouble." "No trouble at all," he replied. "She has something special." Myra felt her cheeks warm. She didn't know how to respond. No one had ever said something like that to her. The technician crouched slightly, so he could speak to her directly. "Do you like the piano?" he asked. Myra nodded slowly. "You should keep listening," he said kindly. "Listening teaches more than you think." With that, he stood up and returned to his work. Myra watched him walk away, her heart beating fast. For the first time, someone recognized something inside her, something she had only dared to feel quietly. And as she looked at the piano again, she felt a new kind of courage growing in her, a courage that whispered, "Maybe one day you won't just tap the keys. Maybe one day you'll play." The next few days at the Arts Center felt different for Myra, even though everything around her looked the same. People still hurried in and out of the halls. Performers still practiced until their voices cracked or their fingers ached. And her mother still worked hard with the same quiet determination. But inside Myra, something had shifted. The small encouragement from the sound technician stayed with her. She replayed his words again and again. "You should keep listening. Listening teaches more than you think." She didn't fully understand what he meant at the time, but something told her it was important. And so, she began to listen more carefully than ever. Every note, every mistake, every half-finished melody, she took it all in as if her mind were storing pieces of a secret puzzle. Each morning she sat in her usual place, near the corner of the rehearsal hall. She kept her sketchbook open, though she didn't use it much anymore. Instead, she focused on the piano whenever someone played it. She watched how their fingers curved, how they pressed each key with confidence, how they used the pedals without looking down. It amazed her how every pianist had a different style. Some played softly, like they were whispering. Others played boldly, like they were shouting from their hearts. She didn't know it yet, but she was absorbing everything like a sponge, soaking up the world of music that surrounded her. One afternoon, a group of important artists came to the hall for a meeting. They were well known in the city, and their posters hung on the walls. Some were singers, some were composers, and a few were instrumentalists who had traveled to many places for performances. Myra recognized some of them because she had seen their pictures often. She tried to stay out of the way, sitting quietly as always. But she watched them carefully, the way they talked about upcoming shows, how they argued gently about timing, lighting, and music choices. They were discussing a large event that the Arts Center was preparing for. It was going to be one of the biggest gatherings of artists that year. One of the artists walked to the piano and tested a few keys. Myra leaned forward without realizing it. She was drawn to the sound, no matter how simple. "You really like the piano, don't you?" A soft voice said from behind her. She turned and saw the same young artist from the day. She had tapped the piano again, the one who had silently watched her. The woman smiled warmly. Myra felt shy but nodded. "It shows," the woman said. "You watch it like it's the sun." Myra didn't know what to say. She looked down at her hands. "Don't worry," the artist added gently. "Everyone starts somewhere. Even the greatest players once stared at a piano the same way you do." The words filled Myra with an unexpected warmth. She didn't fully believe she could ever be like those performers. But hearing someone say it made the thought feel less impossible. Before Myra could respond, someone called the young artist's name, and she walked away with a small wave. Myra watched her join the meeting, feeling a mixture of happiness and confusion. Why were people suddenly noticing her? She hadn't done anything amazing. She had only tapped the piano a little. Later that same day, the hall grew unusually quiet. It was rare for it to be empty, but for a brief moment, all the rehearsal rooms were silent. Myra looked around and noticed that her mother had stepped out to get more supplies, that the piano stood alone again. This time, she didn't feel scared. She felt called. Her feet carried her toward the stage. Her hands were slightly trembling, but not from fear. It was something else, anticipation. She reached the piano and gently pressed a few keys, creating a soft, wandering melody. She didn't have any training, so she simply played what she felt. The notes came out uneven, sometimes too soft, sometimes too loud. But there was emotion in every sound. It was raw and unpolished, but it was sincere. What she didn't realize was that someone else had entered the hall. A tall man wearing a dark jacket, carrying sheet music under his arm, stepped inside. He was one of the visiting composers, someone respected in the music community. He paused when he heard the piano. At first, he assumed it was one of the professional pianists warming up. But as he walked closer, he saw a small girl sitting at the bench, his eyebrows lifted slightly. He didn't interrupt. He stood at the back of the hall, listening carefully. There was something unusual about the way she played, not skill in the technical sense, but emotion. Her playing had a natural flow, as if the music came from a place deep inside her. He watched her press the keys with gentle curiosity, her body leaning forward whenever she discovered a combination of notes she liked. She wasn't afraid of making mistakes. She simply explored. When she hit a wrong note, she paused, tilted her head, and tried again. She didn't frown or get frustrated. She tried until she found a sound she liked. The composer smiled faintly. After a minute, he stepped closer. Myra froze when she heard footsteps approaching. She immediately pulled her hands away from the piano. I'm sorry, she said softly. I wasn't supposed to. It's all right, he interrupted gently. You weren't hurting anything. She looked down, unsure of what to do. He sat on the edge of the stage, keeping a respectful distance. You like music, don't you? He asked. Myra nodded slowly. He looked at the piano thoughtfully before saying, Music is a language. Some people learn it from teachers. Some learn it from listening. And some, he paused, glancing at her, seemed to be born with it already inside them. She didn't understand exactly what he meant, but the words made her chest feel warm. What's your name? He asked. She told him. He repeated it gently, as if saving it in his memory. You have a gift, he said softly. Don't let it go. Before she could respond, he stood up as someone called his name from the hallway. He gave her a small nod and left the hall. Myra sat frozen in place for a moment. She wasn't sure what had just happened. Why were these people talking to her like she mattered? Like they saw something in her that she barely understood herself? For the rest of the afternoon, she stayed close to her mother. She didn't go near the piano again. Not because she didn't want to. She wanted to more than ever, but because she needed time to process everything. Her mother noticed her unusual silence. Are you feeling all right? She asked. Yes, Myra said. Just thinking. Her mother nodded, trusting her once again. That night, Myra couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, the tapping of the keys, the gentle notes, the composer's voice telling her she had a gift. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. She felt something inside her slowly unfolding, like a small flower opening its petals for the first time. She wondered what her father would have said if he were still alive. He always believed in her, even when she was too young to understand music. She imagined him smiling at her, nodding proudly. The next morning at the art center, she entered the hall with a new kind of energy. But something unusual happened as soon as she sat down. Two artists walked in and glanced at her before whispering something to each other. A third artist joined them, also looking at her with a curious expression. Myra looked away, feeling shy. She didn't know that the young artist who had seen her play had told a few people. Not in an exaggerated way, not as gossip, just as something interesting she noticed. The cleaner's daughter touched the piano yesterday. She has such a gentle way of playing. I think she really loves it. Soon, word quietly spread among a few performers. Not that she was talented, not that she was incredible, just that she loved the piano. That alone was enough to make people curious. Later in the afternoon, when her mother was busy in another room, Mira sat in the hall listening to a rehearsal. She watched a pianist practice a difficult piece. The notes were fast, sharp, and powerful. Mira could almost feel the vibration of each sound. When the pianist finished, she looked up and caught Myra watching her. "Do you like this piece?" the pianist asked. Myra nodded shyly. "Come closer." The pianist said kindly. Myra hesitated, but eventually walked a few steps forward. "This part here," the pianist said, pressing 3 keys softly, "is meant to feel gentle, like a quiet breath. And this part," she played a louder series of notes, "is meant to feel like a sudden burst of emotion." Myra watched every finger movement closely. "Music isn't just about playing," the pianist continued. "It's about feeling." She smiled at Mira before returning to her practice. That small moment felt like a gift. By the end of the day, something became clear inside Myra's heart. She didn't just love the piano. She needed it. Music wasn't just something she admired from far away. It was something she carried inside her, something that kept waking up little by little, every time she touched a key. And she still had no idea that something even bigger was coming, something that would change not just her days at the arts center, but her entire future. All it would take was one unexpected moment, and it was much closer than she realized. The next morning arrived with a quiet brightness that felt different from the days before. It was the kind of morning where even the air seemed to wait for something surprising to happen. Inside the large cultural center, workers moved around with their usual routines, carrying equipment, wiping floors, and preparing the rooms for the busy day ahead. But there was a certain feeling lingering in the eye. Building something had shifted since the girl's unexpected moment at the piano. The previous day, her father had already begun his cleaning rounds. He looked tired but pleased, as though the events of yesterday had given him a kind of strength. She walked beside him again, as she often did, keeping close to him while also glancing around the halls, remembering how the music had filled these spaces. She didn't say much, but the small smile on her face showed how deeply the memory stayed with her. She wasn't looking for attention. She wasn't thinking of fame or praise. Her heart still felt warm from simply touching the piano and hearing its voice respond to her fingers. That was enough for her. For now, but outside this quiet bubble, a storm of reactions had already begun. In another part of the center, 2 organizers from the previous day's event were talking in quick, excited whispers. They had been among the people who witnessed the girl's brief piano tapping. They had not expected those soft notes to echo with such purity. Now they were replaying that moment again and again in their minds, arguing gently about how someone so young could create something so beautiful without even trying. "We didn't imagine she could play like that," one of them said, rubbing his forehead. "She barely touched the keys," the other replied. "Imagine what she could do if she really played." Their voices carried more excitement than confusion. They felt they had discovered something rare, a moment that deserved not to be ignored. But they weren't the only ones thinking about her. By mid-morning, word had spread among several musicians who had been rehearsing in nearby rooms. Some of them had already achieved recognition in their fields. Others were just beginning their journeys, but carried strong reputations. All of them had heard stories about a young girl who had touched the piano for a few seconds and left the room silent. They asked questions. They shared their own versions of the story. They argued about who had actually seen her and who had only heard about it. None of them knew her name, but all of them wanted to. Meanwhile, she and her father were busy cleaning a large practice room. She helped him fold a pile of cloths, shaking dust off them before placing them neatly into a bin. Her movements were gentle and careful, as though she respected everything she touched. Her father's mind, however, kept going back to the way she looked yesterday while standing at the piano. He had seen something in her eyes, something he couldn't explain. He knew she was special, of course. All parents believe that about their children. But this was different. Even he could sense that what she had done wasn't normal. Still, he wished for nothing more than her happiness and safety. Suddenly, the door to the practice room opened, and one of the organizers from the previous day stepped inside. He smiled politely and approached the girl's father. "Good morning," he said. "I'm sorry to disturb your work, but may I speak with your daughter for a moment?" Her father blinked in surprise. "Is there a problem?" No, nothing like that," the man quickly assured him. "We were just hoping she might, well, show us something." The girl looked up at her father, waiting for his reaction. She didn't seem nervous, only curious. After a short moment, her father nodded. "All right, but only for a little while. She still has to help me today." The organizer smiled gratefully and gestured for them to follow. He led them to a medium-sized hall where several musicians were already gathered. They weren't standing formally, just chatting, sitting, or tuning their instruments. But when the girl entered the room, the noise lowered almost instantly. Some of them knew her by sight from the previous day. Others only recognized her from descriptions. But all of them leaned forward slightly. Paying close attention, at the front of the room stood a grand piano. The organizer encouraged her gently. "Would you like to play something?" "Anything you want. No pressure." Her father stood off to the side, unsure if this was a good idea, but not wanting to hold her back. He watched her step forward, her small hands hanging by her sides, her eyes drifting toward the piano like she was greeting something familiar. She approached the instrument slowly, running her fingers lightly along its smooth surface. It was not the same piano she touched yesterday, but her smile said she didn't mind. Pianos to her were all like friends. She sat on the bench and took a calm breath. At first, she didn't play. She simply listened to the quiet space, to the faint movements in the room, to the feeling inside her. It was as though she was waiting for the music to come to her instead of forcing it. Then she placed her fingers on the keys. What happened next was nothing dramatic or showy. She didn't burst into a fast piece or try to impress anyone. Instead, she began with a soft melody, a tune she seemed to create at that very moment. The notes were gentle but full, rising and falling with a natural flow, almost like the sound of water moving over stones. There was a kind of innocence in her music, but also something deep that felt older than her age. The musicians who had been standing casually were suddenly silent. Some of them stepped closer. Others froze completely where they stood, afraid to make even the smallest sound. Within moments, the room felt transformed. Her father stared at her, the claws in his hands forgotten. He had seen her hum little songs at home. He had seen her tap rhythms on tables or trace patterns in the air. But he had never heard this. The organizer who brought her let out a slow breath, blinking as though he wasn't sure if he was dreaming. Even the musicians, people who were used to perfection and skill, were watching her with wide eyes. Many of them had trained for years, some for decades. Yet here was a young girl in plain clothes, creating a sound that touched them beyond technique. Her melody grew a little stronger, then softened again, like a story being told without words. It was as though she was sharing something personal, a memory, a feeling, a glimpse into her world. Each note carried sincerity. When she reached the last few notes, she let her hands rest on the keys for a moment before lifting them gently. The room remained completely quiet for several seconds, as though everyone needed time to return to reality. Eventually, a soft breath escaped from someone in the back. Then another. Finally, a musician stepped forward, a well-respected violinist known for his skill. He looked at the piano, then at the girl, and a slow smile appeared on his face. "May I hear more?" he asked softly. Another musician chimed in, followed by another. Soon, They were all asking the same thing politely, their voices carrying genuine admiration. Her father looked overwhelmed. The girl looked thoughtful, as though trying to understand why everyone seemed so moved. She didn't feel special. She didn't think of herself as someone extraordinary. She only felt happy that the piano had let her share what was in her heart. She placed her hands on the keys again. This time, she played something slightly more confident, letting the music explore different emotions: hope, curiosity, warmth, and a touch of sadness. The musicians watched, amazed at how naturally she expressed all of it without hesitation. By the time she finished, several of them were whispering excitedly. Some wanted to teach her. Some wanted to collaborate. Some simply wanted to understand how someone her age could hold such a gift. Her father stepped forward, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. The room's whispers quieted again. "Thank you," he said to the group politely. "But she needs to return to her chores." The musicians exchanged surprised glances, but respected his words. Before she left, several of them lined up almost instinctively to greet her, thank her, or simply see her up close. Her cheeks turned slightly red from all the attention, but she responded kindly, nodding or smiling softly as her father led her back to their cleaning duties. The musicians talked among themselves with renewed excitement. What they had just witnessed wasn't ordinary, and they all wanted to understand the mystery of the cleaner's daughter who could play the piano like that. But the day wasn't over. More attention was coming. More surprises were waiting. And soon she would step into moments far bigger than she ever imagined. The following morning arrived quietly, but the atmosphere inside the cultural center was anything but ordinary. The events of the previous day had spread far beyond one room or one hallway. People were talking: staff, musicians, assistants, even visitors who had only heard whispers. Everyone seemed to be carrying the same question. Who was the young girl who played like that? She walked beside her father again, holding a small cloth in her hand while he pushed his cleaning cart. Her steps were light, almost as if her mind was still floating somewhere in yesterday's melodies. She kept remembering the faces of all those musicians who stood around her, the way they listened with such focus, the way their eyes softened when she finished. It felt unreal, but she didn't consider herself someone important. She didn't even know why people were making such a big deal about it. For her, the music had always been a quiet friend, something she kept inside her heart. Her father, however, felt torn between pride and worry. He had barely slept the previous night. The way everyone looked at her yesterday made him uneasy. He wanted to protect her innocence and keep her away from unnecessary pressure, but he also couldn't deny what he saw. Her music wasn't ordinary. He kept glancing at her as they walked, wondering what today would bring. What he didn't know was that something much bigger was already on its way. At the far end of the building, in the main auditorium, a group of well-known artists had gathered for a rehearsal. Some were respected performers. Others were composers, conductors, or accomplished teachers. They had all come for a special event scheduled for the weekend. Their names were known across countries, and their opinions shaped the world of music. This morning, however, they were not discussing their own performance. They were discussing a little girl. "I heard she played only for a few minutes," one of the artists said, tuning his instrument. "Not even that long," another replied. "Someone told me she created her own melody on the spot." A woman sitting at the piano leaned forward. "Improvised? At her age?" "That's what everyone says." Curiosity filled the room. They were used to meeting talented children, but there was something different about this story. It wasn't simply talent people talked about. It was emotion, honesty, something rare. One of the event organizers entered the auditorium with a thoughtful look on his face. "We may have a chance to hear her again today," he announced casually. The artists exchanged glances. Some raised their eyebrows. Others straightened in their chairs. Is she coming here? One asked. Not exactly. But she's in the building, and her father is working nearby. The interest in the room grew stronger. Meanwhile, the girl and her father were cleaning a hallway when a young assistant approached them politely. "Excuse me," the assistant said. "The main rehearsal group is wondering if your daughter could come for a short demonstration. Only if it's okay with you." Her father felt his chest tighten. He wasn't sure how to respond. He looked at his daughter, who looked back at him without fear, only curiosity. He sighed softly. "It will only be a short moment," he said finally. The assistant smiled gratefully and led them toward the auditorium. The girl didn't speak on the way. She simply followed, quiet and observant, holding on to her father's hand. As they neared the entrance, they could hear soft conversations and distant sounds of instruments being adjusted. When they stepped inside, all the famous artists turned to look. There must have been more than 20 of them, seated or standing across the room. Some were older with years of experience behind them. Others were younger, but celebrated for their brilliance. All of them paused what they were doing. Her father felt overwhelmed. He had never been in a room with so many well-known names before, but his daughter didn't seem scared. She simply looked around politely, her eyes scanning the large space. A respected conductor stepped forward, greeting them with kindness. "Thank you for coming," he said gently. "We heard you played beautifully yesterday. Would you feel comfortable playing something for us today?" The girl looked at her father. He gave her a small nod, though he was still unsure. She stepped forward slowly. The grand piano stood at the center of the room, shining under the lights. She walked toward it with careful steps, her fingers brushing the edge of the bench before she sat down. The room grew still. She placed her hands on the keys, not rushing, not hesitating, just connecting. Then she began to play. The first notes floated into the air like soft light. They were gentle but carried a kind of truth that pulled everyone's attention toward her. No one moved. No one whispered. Even breaths were quieter. Her melody slowly grew, painting emotions without using any words. It was like she was opening a door inside herself and letting them peek through. She didn't think about technique or performance. She simply played what she felt. And these artists' people, who had heard the greatest performers in the world, found themselves unable to look away. The pianist among them leaned forward with wide eyes. A violinist set down his bow slowly, mesmerized. The conductor's expression softened, touched in a way he hadn't expected. She continued. Her small shoulders relaxed, her face calm. Her playing carried innocence and depth at the same time, something that cannot be taught. After a while, the music softened again, winding down gently like a story reaching its end. When she lifted her hands from the keys, the room remained silent. No applause. No immediate reactions. Just silence. A deep, meaningful silence. Then, slowly, one by one, the artists stood up. Some approached the piano. Others approached her father. A few simply stayed where they were, overwhelmed. The pianist was the first to speak. "That was not the playing of a beginner," he said softly. "That was the voice of someone who understands music without being taught." A composer stepped forward next. "Do you study anywhere?" he asked. Her father shook his head. "She has never taken lessons." Whispers filled the room, disbelief, amazement, admiration. One of the conductors walked closer, bending slightly to meet her eyes. "Would you like to learn? Truly learn? Because what you have is rare." The girl looked confused. She didn't understand fame or opportunity. She only understood the piano. Her father stepped forward, protective but polite. "She is young. I don't want her to feel pressure." Several artists nodded respectfully. They understood, but they also knew something extraordinary stood before them. Another artist suggested gently. What if we simply listen again? No lessons, no promises. Just music. The girl blinked softly, then nodded. She played again. This time, the artists formed a quiet semicircle behind her. Some closed their eyes. Others watched her hands carefully, amazed at her instinctive precision. It was as though she had lived inside music her whole life. When she finished the second time, something unexpected happened. The artists lined up one by one, not to judge her, not to interview her, but simply to thank her, to shake her hand, to tell her father how lucky he was, to express how deeply they were moved. Her father stood there, stunned by the scene. Famous artists lining up to greet the daughter of a cleaner. She accepted their words politely, her cheeks warm from all the attention. She didn't show pride because she didn't feel it. She only felt grateful that they liked the sounds she made. Eventually, the conductor placed a gentle hand on her father's shoulder. She has something extraordinary, he said quietly. We don't want to take her away from you. But if she ever wants guidance, this door will always remain open for her. Her father nodded, his throat tight. Thank you, he whispered. As they left the auditorium, the artists remained still, watching her go with awe in their eyes. But this moment was only the beginning. Soon, the world outside the center would begin hearing about the mysterious child with the breathtaking musical touch. And nothing in her life or her father's would stay simple for long. The hall was quiet when the final notes of her playing slowly faded into the air. For a moment, it felt like the entire world had paused just to listen. The little girl, who had once only dared to touch the keys when no one was looking, now sat in the center of a grand stage, with lights glowing above her, and people watching her with soft smiles and warm eyes. She didn't understand how much her life had already changed, and she didn't know how much more was about to come. She only knew that her heart was still beating fast, and her fingers still felt warm from the music she had just played. Her father stood near the side of the stage, still wearing his cleaning uniform. It felt strange for him to be surrounded by well-known artists, directors, musicians, and guests wearing elegant clothes. But no one seemed to care about his clothes or his job. They only cared about one thing, his daughter's gift. He kept watching her with a kind of pride he had never felt before. For years, he had worried about giving her a better life, about being good enough, about whether he was doing enough as a parent. But in that moment, all of those worries melted away. She had shown the world something that didn't come from money, power, or special opportunities. It came from the quiet strength inside her. As she stepped off the stage, several musicians approached her. Their faces were full of admiration. One of them gently lowered himself to her height so he could speak to her without making her feel small. He asked her how long she had been playing, and she answered honestly, saying she had learned only by listening and practicing on old pianos her father would clean. The musician's eyes widened with surprise. Another artist leaned in, asking her what inspired her play. She simply shrugged and said she liked the way the piano made her feel less alone. Her father watched all of this in silence, unsure of what to do. He didn't want to interrupt the moment, but he also didn't want her to feel overwhelmed. Even though she was brave, she was still young, and too much attention made her nervous. When she finally turned and looked at him, he understood her unspoken request. She wanted to go to him. He stepped forward and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. That simple gesture grounded her instantly. She leaned toward him with relief, and he gave her a small, reassuring smile. The hall director approached him with slow, respectful steps. Unlike earlier, when he had barely noticed the child, now his behavior was completely different. He spoke carefully, choosing each word with respect. He explained that the performance had already reached several people through videos shared by the audience, and messages were pouring in from artists who wanted to meet her. The director then made an offer that left the father speechless. He wanted to enroll her in a music program, fully funded, with teachers who were among the best in the country. He said her talent was too rare to be ignored, that the father didn't know what to say. Opportunities like this didn't come for people like him. For a moment, he wondered if there was some mistake. He wasn't used to receiving help, especially from people who usually lived lives far away from his world. The director seemed to understand his hesitation, so he spoke with kindness. He told the father that sometimes life brings moments that rewrite everything we thought was possible. He told him that his role as a parent had already shaped her into the strong, humble girl she was, and now she simply needed guidance to grow. The little girl didn't fully understand the seriousness of the offer. She only tugged her father's sleeve and whispered that she wanted to learn more songs. That simple, innocent wish made the decision easier. The father nodded slowly, still overwhelmed, and accepted the offer. Over the next few days, everything changed. People who had been in the hall continued sharing clips of her performance. Soon, more and more people wanted to know who she was. Journalists asked for interviews, but her father kindly declined most of them. He wanted to keep her safe from the pressure that comes with sudden attention. He knew she was special, but he also knew she was still a child who needed peace, routine, and loved not cameras and headlines. The music program arranged for her to visit a new studio. When she walked inside for the first time, her eyes widened. She had never seen so many instruments in one place. The rooms were bright, with wooden floors that reflected the warm lights. The teachers greeted her gently and let her explore without rushing. When she sat at the grand piano placed in the center of the room, something familiar washed over her. It felt like the first time she had ever touched keys, yet also like she had known them forever. Her lessons began slowly. The teachers didn't try to change her. They didn't push her into playing fast or performing difficult pieces. Instead, they tried to understand her natural style. They listened to her play freely, noticing the way her hands expressed emotions more clearly than her words. She learned how to read music, but even as she practiced, she continued playing by feeling. Her teachers often paused to watch her in silence. They said that some notes she played sounded like stories waiting to be told. Her father started working part-time for the hall instead of cleaning late into the night. The director made sure he could be around for her lessons. He didn't want her to feel alone in a new environment. Whenever she finished a class, she would rush to him to tell him about the new notes she learned, the new techniques she discovered, and the new feelings she found in the music. He listened to everything with the same patience he had always shown. Weeks turned into months, and her talent only grew. She performed in small events organized by the academy. People who heard her often said she played with a rare honesty. She never tried to impress anyone. She simply let the music speak. That sincerity touched listeners deeply. Eventually, a large music festival invited her to perform. It was one of the biggest events of the year, attended by famous artists, producers, and people from around the world. When she walked onto the stage, she wasn't nervous like before. She looked around the grand hall, the shining lights, and the audience waiting quietly. Then her eyes found her father sitting in the corner seat. He nodded gently, just like he always did, and that was all she needed. She placed her hands on the piano and played with a depth that astonished even those who had heard her before. Her music flowed like a story, soft, strong, hopeful, and full of dreams. When the final note drifted into silence, the hall erupted into applause. People stood up, cheering, calling her name. She didn't understand why they were so emotional, but she felt the warmth of their appreciation. After the performance, a long line of artists formed once again. But this time, her father didn't feel out of place. He stood proudly beside her as she greeted them. They spoke to her with genuine respect, not because she was young or surprising, But because she had earned their admiration by the end of the night, her father realized something important. His daughter's journey had started quietly, in the shadow of a life filled with simple routines. But now, she had stepped into a world where her music could grow and reach far beyond anything he had imagined. And yet, through all the changes, she remained the same gentle soul who simply loved the sound of the piano. He held her hand as they walked out of the hall. The night air was cool, and the streetlights glowed softly around them. She looked up at him with a tired but peaceful smile. He squeezed her hand and whispered that he was proud of her, more proud than words could ever express. She didn't answer. She simply leaned her head against his arm, trusting him the way she always had. And together they walked into a future filled with music, hope, and endless possibilities. The next day began with a calmness that almost hid the changes quietly forming around the cultural center. The sun rose softly across the city, touching the tall windows of the building with a warm glow. The cleaner's daughter walked beside her father like always, but something in the air felt different to her. She couldn't explain it. It was like the walls remembered her music from the day before. Her father seemed more thoughtful than usual. He pushed his cart slowly, lost in his own thoughts. Every now and then, he looked at her with a mix of pride and worry. The previous day's scene replayed in his mind again and again. The famous artist standing up, lining up to see her, thanking her, praising her. It was something he never expected to witness, not in his entire life. He wondered what it meant for her future. He wondered if he should protect her from too much attention, or let the world discover her gift. He wondered if she understood how extraordinary the moment truly was. But she didn't seem to think about any of that. She simply held a small cloth in her hands, humming quietly to herself as they made their way down the hallway. To her, yesterday was a memory she treasured, not a doorway to something bigger. Yet, the world was beginning to move far faster than she realized. Because overnight, the story of the mysterious girl had spread. Musicians talked. Assistants talked. And soon, people outside the building began to hear about her. Word reached reporters who frequently covered artistic events. Word reached organizations that supported young talent. Even some people with influence in music circles had begun asking questions. So, by the time she started her day's work beside her father, the building was already preparing for something unplanned. The manager of the center approached her father with a polite but serious expression. "Good morning," he greeted. "I need to speak with you." "It's a boo,"